So I've been meaning to make this video for a minute, and it's about how I feel that mainstream media and our culture and feminism is dishonest about what pregnancy is really like. And this isn't intended to discourage anyone, of course, from having children or getting pregnant or keeping a pregnancy. Absolutely not the goal of this. But I do feel like it would have been, it would be nice in general if maybe even they covered this in sex ed classes when you're in high school, or if you as a woman are just generally informed as to what you're gonna go through, the good and the bad when it comes to childbearing. So kind of the standard feminist narrative is that you can have it all, that you can, go to college, have a career, have kids, go back to your career, after, I don't know, like a month off, and then everything will be hunky-dory. And that is what I expected. I expected pregnancy. I'm young, healthy, strong. I didn't anticipate, didn't end up having any complications while I was pregnant. But that's not really the full picture of, it's not the biological reality, I guess, which I do feel like feminism regularly tries to divorce women from the biological reality of being a woman. And of course, I do feel like, first and foremost, feminists kind of make it seem as though it's not uncommon for women to decide that they don't want to have children, and I know that I was lucky enough to not really be into the whole peer pressure thing when it came to whether or not you wanted to have kids. I always knew I wanted to have kids, but I know a lot of people who, they've been told and they kind of regurgitated, like, I don't know if I ever want to have kids, it's not good for the planet, not good, it's going to distract me in my career, it's going to make it so I can't focus on myself or my relationship with my partner as much, and all of that is true. But for the vast majority of women, you're going to want kids, so it's something to contemplate and plan ahead for, and think about seriously, because of course once you hit your 30s, if you haven't found a partner that you think you would want to have children with, you're going to start stressing out. But back to the point, on the pregnancy front. So I was working full-time as a manager for a small business. I had gotten my college degree. I had a partner that I love. So all of that, good. But then reality hit. So, I think it was probably around 6 weeks when I found out. And up until that point, I hadn't really had morning sickness or anything like that. And luckily, I only really had some occasional nausea. Some women have they have to go to the emergency room because they're vomiting so much that they can't keep enough liquids down. That's not that they become dehydrated. That's not common, Take care of yourself. That shouldn't be so much of an issue. Picking my pimples. But I think the thing that really hit me right away was the fatigue. Was really intense. So of course your body is taking all of this energy that it's regularly putting into your day-to-day activities, and all of that energy is instead going towards very, very rapidly growing a human being inside of you. So you're really tired all the time for the first trimester. Maybe by the middle part of the first trimester on through until you start getting into the second one. And of course, this is just my experience. It varies quite a bit, but generally speaking, this is probably going to be your experience as well. So it made it really difficult because my job was very physical. So it was basically like the only thing I could do in the day was work for 8 hours, go home, and I was done. I was just so tired by the end of the day. Um, and then you start getting into your second trimester and things are pretty hunky-dory. But something else that I noticed pretty immediately was, so I rode a motorcycle at the time. I had to stop riding a motorcycle really fast because what happens is your center of gravity changes really rapidly, which was not something that I anticipated at all. So it made it so that my balance was just off all the time. And you also, your body starts releasing this hormone that makes it so your joints are really loosey-goosey. So it was like I was like floppy and off center, and it was very weird. It was very weird. Like being somebody who's generally, like I did ballet for like 15 years, like I've got pretty good control over my physical being, and so it was a trip to be experiencing this. It was like I had to be way more careful in everything I did all the time, and that was, you know, going into second trimester. Luckily, your fatigue kind of eases up at that point, which was nice. Nausea usually eases up. Some women have like reflux issues. I think part of that has to do with your age, part of that has to do with your diet, but of course there's genetic components as well. So eat well. I found eating a high-fat diet was really good. Low sugar, high fat was the best for me. Which fat doesn't make you fat? Who thought? But yeah, going into that last trimester, so I was still doing a lot of stuff throughout the whole thing. Going into that last trimester, I was kind of trying to get everything buttoned up in life. So I was doing some construction projects. I was retiling a floor when I was about 7 months pregnant. But and I was still working, I think, up until the third trimester. So, excuse me. It's extremely hard on your joints. So when your body is really loosey-goosey, so I was carrying fairly large loads of things around. I was bending over a lot, using power tools and things like circular saws. You know, you got to be like down on the ground. Doing tile work down on your knees. So since your joints are so loose, they're just more easily injured during that time period. So I had to do work in like very short spells, at least the really intense physical stuff, because it was like almost any amount of heavy lifting or bending over would cause especially my lower back to just hurt nonstop. Like sometimes it'd be like if I worked one day, then I'd have to plan on having the next day off because my back would just ache all day long. And if you have a job or you have a lifestyle where you're not doing stuff like that, it'll probably be a lot less of an issue. I would definitely suggest going to a chiropractor. Yeah. Another thing is you're like, since your body is trying to not attack the infant inside of you, fetus, for those of you who don't believe it's a person, it's your body is super susceptible. It decreases your immune resistance, so your body's super susceptible to like everything. So I caught a stomach bug and a regular flu while I was pregnant, and it was pretty miserable. And that's super common. Like that's another thing that's not really talked about. You know, they always talk about like, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, pregnant women get vaccinations and stuff like that because they're like super susceptible to well, they don't say that it's because I think what they're implying, or at least how I understood it beforehand, was that if you were, it was just out of like general concern that it's probably not good to have pregnant people sick. But I did not realize that it was because you are way more susceptible to everything, every kind of illness. So it's not a bad idea. Hello, it's okay, it's okay. It's not a bad idea to just avoid large crowds for probably the last 6 months. But if you can do it before then that's probably wise as well. So really, the whole like pregnant woman like staying home, chilling out, and not just her being oppressed by the patriarchy. Like, it's definitely like, I think I've heard people who are, talking about it a little more realistically, calling it, basically you're disabled for a period of time. Accurate. You are disabled for a period of time. Like, you cannot run as fast, your balance is off, you have to eat a ton more, you're just generally less capable when it comes to absolutely everything, including so my midwife calls it placenta brain. Your linear cognitive abilities go down when you're pregnant and postpartum for, varying amounts of time. Something else that they don't tell you about. So I was like super spacey and forgetful. It made it, of course, I'm already spacey and forgetful, so it made it more difficult to function. And then, of course, the birth is always intense. Now, and I'm not discouraging people from being physically active when they're pregnant, especially, throughout the whole thing is really important, but especially at the end when you're kind of like, I'm super fat and I just want to sit around and eat food. Like, you need to stay physically active so that the labor doesn't end up being super long. So I was walking like 2 to 4 miles a day, but you need to do like the low impact stuff, because again, it's like you're carrying this huge weight on the front of you and it's really hard on your back and the rest of your joints. Just like, if you're overweight in any situation, it's really hard on your back and your joints. But you still have to, stay active so that you don't have like a 12-hour, 3-day, whatever sort of labor. Not fun. So there's a happy medium for sure. But then there's the whole, you do the birth thing, super intense, really fun. We did a home birth. That was great for us. But the postpartum part, it was like, oh, okay, it's like I don't think that I like really thought about it until I was like 9 months pregnant, and then it was like you look down at your tummy and you're like, wow, that's a lot of stuff, and that has to like come out of me. And you don't really think about that too much, and it's like, well, women have been doing this for a long time, this is what we're designed to do, like obviously this will, your body will do it and then heal up and it'll be fine. And women go back to work after 3 weeks, and oh my gosh. So I remember like probably a week after I gave birth, and of course you're kind of sleep deprived and your body is definitely still healing from that whole thing, because I think probably especially the first time around, it's really hard on everything, and everything has to kind of, I want to say bounce back. That's a nice word for it. But I remember about a week after I gave birth, and I was like, today I'm going to cut my toenails. Because, of course, I couldn't reach my toes for the last month or so, and I didn't really want someone else to cut my toenails. It's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like other people cutting my toenails. It makes me nervous. And that was my goal for the whole day. Obviously I was also taking care of an infant, but that was it. It was like, my body's healing, I hurt, I'm gonna stay in bed, take care of this infant, and today my big accomplishment will be to cut my toenails. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of where you're at that point. And your body just, that part of your body just hurts. Everything's kind of, literally all of your internal organs have to rearrange again. So within a year's time period, all of your organs have been smushed up into your chest cavity, and then you just gotta have to and then in a 1-day period, everything like drops back down. Everything has to like rearrange and kind of settle back into place. So it takes it takes some time, obviously, for all of that to happen. Your hoo-ha kind of needs to have a bit of a bounce back time. All of that is not. It's as uncomfortable as you would imagine that it is. And so I know, like, by about 3 weeks, I was still, like, I still needed to spend a fair amount of time during the day laying down. And if you don't do things like that, there are theories that it can cause you some long-term physical harm if you're on your feet too much after you give birth, because when your organs are kind of rearranging, you don't want gravity like tugging on them too much as well. And you can tell if you're on your feet too much, your insides hurt, your internal organs hurt. So if you have a job where you sit down a lot, I could kind of see you being able to go back to work after 3 weeks, but really you probably need a couple of months to heal up. Like, I know that my midwife said that I should take it, well, yeah, so your abdominal muscles kind of split down the middle and part to either side as well. So if you do too much physical activity, you can cause them to not knit back up properly on top of your organs needing to go back into place. Sorry, feeding time. So you really do, for your long-term health, you need to take it easy. Also, and I know that this is something that's going to be fairly unpopular, you don't really want, like, the desire to be around your child after you give birth is like a overwhelming biological urge. Like, I've heard a lot of stories of moms like going back to work and then just like day one turning in their resignation and being like, nope, going home and taking care of the baby, because that's what you've been programmed to do. So it's not as though feminism has like erased this patriarchal, socially constructed thing that's making it so that women have to stay home with their babies. But I feel like basically we had all of this like knowledge that had been passed down from generation to generation of women over like 150,000 years, and then like feminism came along and all of a sudden it was like no, now it's like it's not okay to talk about it, and we've also just like lost a lot of that knowledge. So like, thank goodness that I had a midwife who was extremely well read and would sit down with me like for like 2 hours at every single appointment and tell me like what to expect and like how to manage some of my, some of the things that I would have to deal with using like diet and like herbal supplements and stuff. Because I can't imagine, like, just seeing a doctor for, like, 10 minutes, like, once a month, and him being like, oh, everything's hunky-dory, and then just being sent off to, like, deal with whatever. And I remember, like, talking with my mother and some other people about, like, things that were happening with me. And they were like, oh, yeah, I remember that, and going through that. And it's like, why didn't anyone ever, like, tell me about any of this stuff? Like, I never got the talk from either one of my parents. But this is it's just, since the majority of women are probably still going to have at least one child, it might be nice if we had some idea of what that was like, other than just like knowing the general mechanics of what's gonna go on. Yeah, you think that's funny too. 'Cause it's like this weird taboo blind spot that we have now. Because it is one of those things where it's like you really cannot deny the biological differences between men and women when women are pushing people out of themselves. It's pretty amazing. And then there's the emotional part that they don't tell you about. So I'm usually like, I would consider myself fairly rational, but that doesn't really mean anything. But you become like wildly irrational. It's like PMS, like randomly for like it's not just for the pregnancy, it's like postpartum too. Like postpartum is like rough because it's like your body's swinging back after all those hormones. So that's something that should definitely be talked about more. Like, you will just randomly like cry and get upset over things that don't make any sense. Like, I remember like I read a lot and I was reading books and it was like I was just bawling my eyes out whenever anything like moderately sad happened. So I've talked like way too long about this. But in conclusion, there's a reason behind all of the fun things that we've been doing around pregnancy for, oh gosh, probably tens of thousands of years. So, before you just say, oh, that was some oppressive, socially constructed something that we imposed on women for some reason, just think about, look into the biology of it, think about it critically, because they're not teaching us human biology. If they ever did, they're certainly not doing it now. And if having a baby is something that you want to do in your life, it's definitely good to be prepared so that you can plan ahead well enough that you're not gonna be, shocked and surprised when things aren't the way that the mainstream tells you that they ought to be or are or should be or whatever.